kept in the thick woods and on the lookout all the time. All I could get to eat was berries and what was left over from breakfast. By the time it was night I was pretty hungry, so when it was good and dark I slid out from shore before moonrise and paddled over to the Illinois bank, about a quarter of a mile. I went out in the woods and cooked a supper, and had about made up my mind I would stay there all night, when I hear a plunkety-plunk, plunkety-plunk, and says to myself, horses coming, and next I hear people's voices. I got everything into my canoe as quick as I could, and then went creeping through the woods to see what I could find out. I hadn't got far when I hear a man say, "We better camp here if we can find a good place. The horses is about beat out. Let's look around." I didn't wait, but shoved out and paddled away easy. I tied up in the old place, and reckoned I would sleep in the canoe. I didn't sleep much. I couldn't, somehow, for thinking. And every time I waked up I thought somebody had me by the neck. So the sleep didn't do me no good. By and by I says to myself, I can't live this way. I'm a-going to find out who it is that's here on the island with me. I'll find it out or bust. Well, I felt better right off. So I took my paddle and slid out from shore just a step or two, and then let the canoe drop along down amongst the shadows. The moon was shining, and outside of the shadows it made it most as light as day. I poked along well on to an hour, everything still as rocks and sound as sleep. Well, by this time I was most down to the foot of the island. A little ripply, cool breeze begun to blow, and that was as good as saying the night was about done. I give her a turn with the paddle and brung her nose to shore, then I got my gun and slipped out and into the edge of the woods. I sat down there on a log and looked out through the leaves. I see the moon go off watch, and the darkness begin to blanket the river. But in a little while I see a pale streak over the tree-tops and knowed the day was coming. So I took my gun and slipped off towards where I had run across that campfire, stopping every minute or two to listen. But I hadn't no luck somehow. I couldn't seem to find the place. But by and by, sure enough, I catched a glimpse of fire away through the trees. I went for it, cautious and slow. By and by I was close enough to have a look, and there laid a man on the ground. It most give me the fantods. He had a blanket round his head, and his head was nearly in the fire. I sat there behind a clump of bushes in about 6 foot of him, and kept my eyes on him steady. It was getting gray daylight now. Pretty soon he gapped and stretched himself, and hove off the blanket, and it was Miss Watson's Jim. I bet I was glad to see him. I says, "Hello, Jim," and skipped out. He bounced up and stared at me wild. Then he drops down on his knees and puts his hands together and says, "Don't hurt me, don't. I ain't never done no harm to a ghost. I always liked dead people, and done all I could for 'em. You go and get in the river again, where you belongs, and don't do nothing to old Jim, atter's always your friend." Well, I warn't long making him understand I warn't dead. I was ever so glad to see Jim. I warn't lonesome now. I told him I warn't afraid of him telling the people where I was. I talked along, but he only sat there and looked at me, never said nothing. Then I says, "It's good daylight. Let's get breakfast. Make up your campfire good." "What's the use of making up the campfire to cook strawberries and such truck? But you got a gun, hain't you? Then we can get something better than strawberries." "Strawberries and such truck," I says. "Is that what you live on?" "I couldn't get nothing else," he says. "Why, how long you been on the island, Jim?" "I come here the night after you's killed." "What, all that time?" "Yes, indeedy." "And ain't you had nothing but that kind of rubbish to eat?" "No, sir, nothing else." "Well, you must be most starved, ain't you?" "I reckon I could eat a hoss. I think I could. How long you been on the island?" "Since the night I got killed."
"No! Why, what has you lived on? But you got a gun. Oh, yes, you got a gun. That's good. Now you kill something and I'll make up the fire."
So we went over to where the canoe was, and while he built a fire in a grassy open place amongst the trees, I fetched meal and bacon and coffee pot and frying pan, and sugar and tin cups, and the nigger was set back considerable, because he reckoned it was all done with witchcraft. I catched a good big catfish, too, and Jim cleaned him with his knife and fried him. When breakfast was ready, we lolled on the grass and eat it smoking hot. Jim laid it in with all his might, for he was most about starved. Then when we got pretty well stuffed, we laid off and lazied. By and by Jim says,
"But looky here, Huck. Who was it that was killed in that shanty if it warn't you?"
Then I told him the whole thing, and he said it was smart. He said Tom Sawyer couldn't get up no better plan than what I had. Then I says, "How do you come to be here, Jim? How'd you get here?" He looked pretty uneasy, didn't say nothing for a minute. Then he says,
"Maybe I better not tell."
"Why, Jim?"
"Well, there's reasons. But you wouldn't tell on me if I'd to tell you, would you, Huck?"
"Blamed if I would, Jim."
"Well, I believe you, Huck. I run off."
"Jim!"
"But mind, you said you wouldn't tell. You know you said you wouldn't tell, Huck."
"Well, I did. I said I wouldn't, and I'll stick to it. Honest, Injun, I will. People would call me a low-down abolitionist and despise me for keeping mum, but that don't make no difference. I ain't a-goin' to tell, and I ain't a-goin' back there anyways. So now, let's know all about it."
"Well, you see, it is this way. Old missus, that's Miss Watson, she pecks on me all the time, and treats me pooty rough, but she always said she wouldn't sell me down to Orleans. But I noticed there was a nigger trader round the place considerable lately, and I begin to get uneasy. Well, one night I creeps to the pooty late, and the door wa'n't quite shut, and I hear old missus tell the widder she gwine sell me down to Orleans, but she didn't want to, but she could get $800 for me, and it is such a big stack of money she couldn't resist. The widder she tried to get her to say she wouldn't do it, but I never waited to hear the rest. I lit out mighty quick, I tell you. I took out and shinned down the hill, and 'spect to steal a skiff along the shore somewheres above the town. But there was people a-stirrin' yet, so I hid in the old tumble-down cooper shop on the bank to wait for everybody to go away. Well, I was there all night. There was somebody round all the time. 'Long about 6 in the mornin' skiffs begin to go by, and 'bout 8 or 9 every skiff that went long was talkin' 'bout how your pap come over to the town to say you's killed. These last skiffs was full of ladies and gentlemen a-goin' over for to see the place. Sometimes they pull up at the shore and take a rest before they started across. So by the talk I got to know all 'bout the killin'. I was powerful sorry you's killed, Huck, but I ain't no more now. I laid there under the shavin's all day. I is hungry, but I wa'n't feared, 'cause I knowed old missus and the widder was goin' to start to the camp meetin' right after breakfast and be gone all day, and they knows I goes off with the cattle about daylight, so they wouldn't 'spect to see me round the place, and so they wouldn't miss me till after dark in the evenin'. The other servants wouldn't miss me, 'cause they'd shin out and take holiday soon as the old folks was out of the way. Well, when it come dark, I took out up the river road, and went 'bout 2 mile or more to where there wa'n't no houses. I made up my mind about what I was gwine to do. You see, if I kep' on tryin' to get away afoot, the dogs 'd track me. If I stole a skiff to cross over, they'd miss that skiff, you see, and they'd know 'bout where I land on the other side, and where to pick up my track. So I says, a raft is what I's after. It don't make no track. I see a light a comin' round de p'int by and by, and I wade in and shove a